ex-addict turned successful CEO.
One of my greatest aspirations in that time or accomplishments is I made a bet with a guy I could go a year without wearing pants. I had a lot of clients who were drug smugglers. I woke up on a center seat of an airplane, no idea how I got there, and I had bankrupted a family business.
Welcome today on the show, Doug Fleener. Doug is known as the daily performance expert. Doug Fleener is an ex-addict turned successful CEO. Today, Doug and I are going to be talking about the day that makes the year, that makes the life. It's how to transform your work and your life with one day of success. Doug Fleener, welcome to the show.
Bert, thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
So we'll talk about your background. How did you go from ex-addict turned successful CEO?
Well, my story starts, and we were talking beforehand about the beach and the ocean. And so back in the 80s, I was actually in the marine business. So I was in South Florida, and I was living out what I like to call my Jimmy Buffett song. And, one of my greatest aspirations in that time or accomplishments is I made a bet with a guy I could go a year without wearing pants. I did wear shorts. But that kind of tells you who I was in my 20s. And I actually, again, this was in the 80s. So I had a lot of clients who were drug smugglers. And I had a good gig going for a while. I would order in product into a marine supply store and trade it for cocaine. And you can only keep that one going so long. The vendors want paid. And and in the book, there's actually a story. I'll give it away a little bit. But one of my last drinking and drugs, I woke up on a center seat of an airplane, no idea how I got there, and I had bankrupted a family business.
Wow.
And so my life fell apart in late 86, early 87. And my father told me, I needed to go into recovery, or he was my business partner, so he's going to kill me. And I went into recovery, and I hit rock bottom, and I started to climb out of my life that I'd done, and I had to learn how to live without a drug and without a drink a day at a time. And I had to start all over. I had to get rid of that business. I mean, it was bankrupt. So what I ended up doing was I needed to find a job, so I went to work for the Sharper Image, and great company to work for at the time. They had all the cool products. The internet completely busted them, but I ended up just realizing that I needed to move out of Florida, and I moved to Boston. I wanted to watch the Celtics play. That's the only reason I moved to Boston. I knew one person. And, I got really lucky, and I had right time, right place. And we all, a lot of time we get luck. Sometimes we don't always see it when it's in front of us. And I met a guy who worked for Bose Corporation, went to work for Bose.
The headphone people?
Yep.
Okay.
And he actually, one of the reasons I asked him about working there, because he seemed to never be working, and he seemed really happy. So I'm like, how do I get this job? And so I got the job, and ended up becoming a sales rep. But I always had these years at Sharper Image, I always had retail in my blood. And Bose was starting a retail division. And right time, right place. So basically, I took them from one store to 100 stores. And this was before, matter of fact, we had stores for about 2 years, and Apple came to us and said, hey, we're thinking about opening our stores. Well, can we learn from you? There's a lot of Apple stores now and no Bose stores. So
they did a good job. They learned
they did a great job. But, Microsoft didn't have stores. Nobody really had stores.
Right.
And but in 2001, kind of everything changed. Decided I wanted to go a different direction in my life, and end up speaking, consulting, and then a client asked me to actually run his business. And so I ran that business for a while. But all along the way, what I discovered was that the principles I learned in recovery were helping me in business. And that's why I end up after that business I just was running was based on low interest rates. So we had exploded during the pandemic. We had to lay off majority of the staff when interest rates went up. So that's when I really, put it down. I was like, these elements of recovery that I've lived my entire life. So I've been clean almost 37 years.
Wow, that's fantastic. That's incredible. So again, your book, The Day That Makes the Year Makes a Life, Transform Your Work and Life with One Day Success. That kind of encompasses, or that is kind of like the recovery, was it philosophy, right? You just take it one day at a time.
Absolutely. And so right in those early days, those one day at a times is how I got through. I mean, you realize is that the day I stopped drinking and drugging, my life was a disaster. I mean, I'd let down everyone in my life. I was morally, I was spiritually, I was physically, I was everything bankrupt.
Right.
And so, the only way to, I had been actually a blackout drinker for about 350 nights a year.
Wow.
Yeah. So, then all of a sudden to stop drinking was talk about, I had to change my life. And so those concepts, and that's why there's 6 principles in the book. And the very first one is called The Day. I mean, all success happens in the day, right?
Yeah.
It's what I do today that makes my tomorrow, that makes my year, makes my life. And so that's the first principle. So yes, it's not a recovery book, but it's based on the things that I learned to be able to apply in business.
Yeah. So one of the things in the book that I like, and I want to talk about this because I think it's human nature not to take responsibility for your mistakes. Mm-hmm. But in your book, you talk about taking responsibility is a superpower and why you need to own your mistakes. So talk about this because, again, especially, when you're in your 20s and 30s, man, making a mistake, you think it's the end of the world. You try to hide these things. But what's interesting is you look at some of these powerful CEOs and the good ones admit their mistakes. What is it about admitting your mistakes that turns it into a superpower?
Well, thanks for asking that. So, what I learned is that, again, I'm going to go back into my recovery days is, the only way that I could rebuild my life was taking responsibility for what I had done. Right. And I had to own it. And somewhere along the line, I probably heard it. I don't have anything original. I'm just pretty good at interpreting it sometimes is, that you can't change what you don't own. You can't change what you don't own. So when I blame, when I make excuses, when people act in a certain way, one of the things they taught me in recovery is that I was responsible for everything that happened in my life. Now, when they told me that, I thought you were asking me to become a doormat. It was opposite, right? So I own it. And so, I don't own Bert's actions. He could say something, upset me. Who knows? We still got a ways to go. But what I do own and take responsibility is for my reaction. Right. And so that's really, so when you actually start to take that on, and I think, when I was in my 20s and 30s, everything was a major issue and everything was a disaster. And, and I didn't like to admit mistakes. I mean, I grew up in a family, you went to great lengths to not admit you did something wrong. Right. And so, but what it does is it allows you, and, it's interesting, especially for people, say, in business, when you make a mistake, the faster you own it, the faster you take it to your boss and say, not blaming anybody. Here's what happened. Here's what I did. And 2 more things. Here's what I'm going to do to fix it. And here's what I'm going to do to not do it again.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, obviously, look, being in that kind of family situation, that makes it tough. But I think that's very human. I mean, what's interesting about that, it's not like your parents come to you and say, okay, in this family, I don't know, maybe yours did this, but most people aren't told directly. We don't admit our mistakes. This is something that we learn.
Right.
And it's interesting because what I have realized is that when somebody gets up on stage, or not necessarily stage, but just stands up, whether it's on stage or you're having dinner or family setting, doesn't matter, and you say, here's a mistake I made. There, we don't think of them as weak. We think of them, wow, this person's brave. That's courageous. But somehow we have this weird thing that if I admit a mistake, or if I admit that I don't have all the answers, or if I admit that I'm weak in this area, that somehow that makes me bad or look bad. But at the same time, when somebody else does it, we're thinking, man, that person is so courageous to admit that. And it's just weird to me that we have this dichotomy. But it's so important because, first of all, especially when you lay out your 4 steps there, when we go through those 4 steps, it gives us an opportunity to learn and grow and become a better leader. And one of the things that helps us make good decisions is learning when we make from bad decisions. So I just don't know. I don't know where, again, what is it? Shame, embarrassment? What is that?
Yeah, I think you make really a great point that when we see it in others, we admire it. When we see it in ourselves, and I think it's about sometimes you have to separate who I am to what I do, right? And so I'm a human. I'm going to make mistakes, right? I say things I shouldn't say. And now I will say that one of the things that helps me is every day when I wake up, I try to really work on who I'm going to be as a person that day. And then at the end of the day, was I that person? When I'm kind of locked in like that, I have a tendency to, not make the stupid mistakes with my partner and my kids. And but I think it's understanding is that it's not what happened, right? It's not who to blame. And so I think, when you quit blaming people, you quit blaming yourself.
Right. And it's interesting because taking responsibility, not blaming others, not looking for an excuse. This is a hallmark of a good leader. Whether it's parental leader or a CEO or a Boy Scout or whatever, when you can sit there and say, yeah, you know what? I own it. I made that mistake. I learned from it. This is what I'm going to do not to do it again. And here's how I'm going to fix it. You're like, okay, cool. One of the great things about humans, for the most part, is we're willing to give a second and even a third chance. I mean, there's a history of CEOs that have screwed up, of politicians that have screwed up, and when they take ownership, and especially, again, back to your 4 steps, when they say, listen, I made a mistake, it's not going to happen again, this is how we're going to fix it, we're like, okay, let's see what this guy does. Not to pick on anyone particularly, I'm just going to use him as an example. Back in the day where Bill Clinton was accused of wrongdoing, and he was trying to tiptoe around, I did not have sexual relationships with that woman. You knew from his face, his body language, that he was lying. And all of the energy and money that was spent on trying to catch him in his lie, I forgot how many, I think it was a couple of million, but it was just, we as investigators and as humans, and we didn't want to give that up. We wanted him to admit it. And what's so interesting is finally, when he admitted it, it was like, okay, it's done. It's over with. Let's move on. All right, but let me talk about this, because I think this is another important thing in your book, is that you mentioned micro changes. Talk about micro changes and why this is so important.
Well, I think the thing is that, again, and these principles, they all fit together. So if we just, go back real quick to taking responsibility, right? When you make a mistake, it doesn't define you. It doesn't define you going forward, right? It's just something that happened in the day. And so, the micro changes to me is about every morning I get up, I want to improve 3 things a day. It can be my business. It can be me personally. It can be something around the house. And I know a lot of people, and they've been very successful. They're kind of focused on that 1% improvement. I can't do the math. I don't know what 1% looks like, but what I can do is change 3 things a day. That I can do. And, when you change 3 things a day, you get 1,095 improvements in a year. That adds up.
Absolutely. And what I like about that, I'm like you. I don't know what 1% is. How do you measure 1% of today or whatever? But when you're focused on making 3 changes a day or 2 changes a day or just even 1 change a day, then you can say, okay, I've made 365 changes, or whatever it is, 1,000 whatever changes if you're doing 3 a day. That to me is an awesome strategy for total improvement. You're focused. You know what you're doing. You're changing 3 things a day, as opposed to 1%. What does that mean?
Right. And so it really connects right to the macro changes, is that, look, if I'm going to change 3 things a day, I'm not going to make some humongous improvement, right? So whatever my big improvement, excuse me, in my business, in my personal life, it's all going to happen in these steps and these small things. And when I talk about in the book about one day success, I just have a goal. I have a goal to be better than I was yesterday. If I can be a better person, I can be a better business person. I can be a better partner. And so, for me, it allows me to be really connected to what I'm doing and who I am. So, again, with micro changes, I just every day I'll look at any type of work I do. And actually in the book, actually it's not in the book, but there's a guy I worked for who used to tell me that every day I walked in that Sharper Image store to look for one thing to improve. And I'd be like, oh, there's nothing to improve. And he would look over there and see 50 things to improve. Right. And so I wasn't looking, I didn't know how to look for him. But when I know I just want to be a little bit better. And so that's something I can just do. How can I make this better? It's an easy question to ask yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. And I like what you said there. He was looking for opportunities and you weren't. And so that was the difference. He could see 50 things that could be worked on. And at that time in your life, it's a great store. Everything's clean and everything's supposed to be where it's at. I don't see anything that needs to be improved. But the reality is we can always be a little bit better. I mean, that's what life is all about, is to get just a little bit better. To your point, it's not about saying, hey, I'm going to be this much better. I'm going to change everything by tomorrow. But if I can just do those 1 or 2 or 3 things, just a micro change over a period, it's colossal.
Yeah. And and if you take it back in my story, right? So, right, in 1987, right? I mean, I was a disaster, right? And I didn't know how to live without drugs. I didn't know how to not live without just getting loaded every night. And so it's not like I'm going to walk into some recovery meeting and become a brand new person, right? I had to start to make those little changes. And, it's a journey. It's, as you said, it's about each day. Am I getting a little bit closer and making everything a little bit better to the person and the business that I want? And that applies regardless of what you do.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great principle or a great strategy. One of the things that I love about is the 12-step program that most of us are familiar with. They're very keen on not putting a bunch of pressure on yourself. You're taking it one day at a time. You're taking it 1 hour at a time, and knowing that we all sometimes slip and we have to start over again. But if you slip up or if you make a mistake, you don't beat yourself up over it. And I think that's, again, it's a human nature thing to do, that, to just clobber yourself, and that is counterproductive. So I love this idea of micro changes. Let's talk about the power of intention, how to choose what to prioritize, because I think this is really tough for many people. So give me your take on this.
Well, one of the things I do for working is I work with business owners to become more effective. And I tell you, and this work came out of, I used to do a lot of consulting with businesses. And, one of the things I discovered is every time I worked with any business, we're working on the marketing, we're working on this and that and everything. What I came to realize is that if the owner would just change a little bit of how they worked, they could change so much more. And I really like the business owner because they have the power to change whatever they want. You're inside a company, not as much, but it still applies. And so what I discovered is how do I help you become highly effective so quickly? And when you get down to it, when everything's a priority, what? Nothing's a priority. Right. So first is understanding is what are the one or two things right now that really matter in your business? And, I hear a lot of people talk about staffing and, regardless of what the business, I have a coffee shop around the corner. They just opened up, a little independent place, closed down. They got to temporarily close because they can't find staff. It is hard to find staff. We know that. And so if you're dependent on staff, and most people are in business, that's your priority. And so what are you doing every day in that, right? People just get kind of stuck in doing their to-dos. And so I always talk about that, right? Intentional actions create intentional results. And so what are you going to do today? What are the one or two things you're going to do to move those priorities forward? And just, it becomes that. Let other things fall. We also have a tendency, and I know I was guilty of this, of working on the things I like to work on.
Sure.
Right? Not the things that I really need done.
Right. Not the hard stuff or the boring stuff. I want to work on this because it's fun. I resonate with this.
Yeah. Right. I enjoy that, making that really funny, little Facebook post, but I have no staff. Right. So it's understanding that, right. It's about priorities. And then what are you going to do on a daily basis? You don't get results without action.
Right. One of the things that I've been working on this year, I got this idea from, he has a podcast. He's a neuroscientist, Huberman. Can't remember his first name, Dr. Huberman. Right. He's usually dressed in black and he's got a beard and kind of, so he talks about, he quantified, there's that saying, it's not the end, it's the journey, or it's not the goal, it's the journey. And so he kind of really, from a neuroscientific point of view, he talked about if you can only get a dopamine hit from reaching your goal, you make reaching your goal so much harder because you're not enjoying the process of reaching that goal. You got to train your mind to get a dopamine hit from, as you mentioned, doing the boring stuff, the hard stuff, the stuff that makes you feel uncomfortable. If you can do that and get a little dopamine hit there, then you'll be able to do a little bit more and a little bit more. Before you know it, that really boring, horrible task got done, and then you get a bigger dopamine hit. And so I just love that idea. So that's what I've been working on, because like you, I'm like, I don't want to call anybody. I know I got to call those 3 people and give them really bad news, and I'm going to put that off till tomorrow. All right, let's talk about this, because one of the things that I realized doing all the stuff that you've done, giving up the drugs, the drinking, changing your life, even figuring out, the 3 things you're going to work on, or the 3 things that you're going to give priority to me takes courage. So what I find is that sometimes people will say, well, this is what I need to do, but it scares me. So what do you tell to a CEO? What do you tell to somebody who says, I know what I got to do, because we all do, but I'm scared to do it. I don't know how to get started. How do you deal with fear? How do you deal with that paralysis?
Oh, that's a great question. So, right. I mean, it's really simple, and I'm a pretty simple guy. You just got to get started. And I find that I try to build this group of people around me that I communicate, text, call, talk to on a very regular basis. And one of the things that I have found is to get started on something is I got to speak it out loud to somebody. And, I need there's some accountability. And so I need to say to somebody, hey, I need to get this done. And I do it with a lot of people. So what are you going to do today? And, the fear most of the time, right, is just it's really not really valid at all. Right. So, look, if you got to walk across a tightrope across the Grand Canyon and that's what you have to do, then that's some fear.
Yeah.
Right. Right. But, but if you want to, right, if you've got to, call, like say, make that phone call to somebody, you got to do something. It's usually not fear, right? It's uncomfortableness. And I think there's a big difference.
There is. You're right. I mean, when you look at those two, huge difference, right? You got to let somebody go. Totally uncomfortable. It is a little scary. You got to give somebody awful news. I'm not saying you should do it like this, but worst case scenario, you could send somebody a text message and say, "I'm sorry, got to let you go." I mean, that's kind of cowardly, but it's better than not doing it. Or because this has happened to me, somebody actually hired me to let go a couple of their employees. You hire somebody, you can find a way. And I like what you said. Look, sometimes the only way to do it is just you got to get started and using your three principles there, or your three things. What's the one thing you could do to get this one thing started? Because it ain't going to get resolved unless you get started, right? And I think Brian Tracy, his quote was, "How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time." Absolutely. And there's just sometimes there's just no way around it. You just got to do those hard things. Life, in my opinion, is about doing hard things over and over again. It's running a business, that's hard, and in some cases it's scary. Having a family, that's hard and sometimes scary.
Yeah. Nobody warned me about that part.
Right. We have 5 kids, and each time a child was born, it was scary. It was like, this is going to be rough. And then the last child turned out to be twins, so we went from having 3 kids to 5 kids, and that was a huge game changer. I always tell my and then on top of that, they were twin girls, so I always tell my girls, this is when they started talking to boys around the age of 13 or 14. My hair just fell out, and they said, "No more. Okay, we can't take it." But I mean, that's really what life is you're doing scary things over and over again. I don't think we ever stop being scared. We just change. So if you grew your business to 500,000, great. Now to get it from 500,000 to $1 million, that could be a little scary, but you get it to $1 million, and then the next goal is 2 million. It's what your whole book's about, is this never ending improvement thing. That's really what I think life and business is all about.
So true. And I just love this, your connection to like being a parent. Can you imagine like the kids came home, right? Like, "Hey, what's for dinner?" I just have too much fear to make dinner. You're just not going to happen today. And it's just the case. And just real quick on this is, when I used to spend a lot of time going, and I used to go to a client's place for one day, and I'd spend the entire day with them, and I would just do a brain dump. And the people who are struggling the most had the most ideas. And it's funny because I was like, what can you tell us? And at the end of the day, I'd just be like, just do what you're supposed to do. You know to do it. Just do it. Nike had it right.
Yeah, that's right. Just well, so this is my strategy, because I'm one of those creative people. I can come up with ideas all day long. I'm constantly coming up with an idea. And at one point, I would not only come up with an idea, but then I'd have to buy the URL, the domain name for it. So at one point I had like 1,000.
We are lost brothers.
Yeah.
I call those domains my journey of broken dreams.
Exactly. So what I started doing is I have a journal, an idea journal. I'll write it down there, get it out of my system. I finally come to grips that I'm not going to buy any more domain names. And matter of fact, I just sold one off. So I was like, yes, I've had this domain name for like 12 years. Yeah, right? I finally sold it. That's the most, that's probably the best thing I could have done sooner than later. Either way, I write it down. I kind of get it out of my system. Oh, this would be a great domain name. I'm going to do this, blah, blah, blah. And I might waste 10 or 15, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour doing a brain dump into this idea journal. But it's so much better than spending real time and real resources, money, whatever, taking somebody off of another priority to get them to waste time on this, that I don't have the bandwidth. We don't have the bandwidth to do any more than we're doing. We're a tiny little company.
Right.
No, it's just amazing.
Well, we get off this Zoom. I'm going to go put a couple up for sale, and I'm going to get to that. So,
all right. So let me ask you this: you're sitting around, you're thinking, I need to write a book. What was the catalyst for your book? What kind of got you off centered and made you write a book? Because as we know, writing a book is scary. It takes time. You have to a bunch of rewrites. So it's not an easy task like buying a domain name. So tell us about your book journey.
Yeah. So it really started with, about 11 months ago, I had laid off a bunch of people in this company. I went to the owner. Hey, someone else needs to be laid off, me. So, and it was the right thing to do. And, so anyway, it was like, all right, what am I going to do in this next chapter? But the more I thought about it, the more I just realized, really, I wanted to be able to get down on paper what it was in recovery that helped me be successful. And again, it's not a recovery book. You don't have to have a drug addiction or be a workaholic or whatever for these principles. Look, everybody's read the book, and I've actually had a lot of non-business people reading the book. They all say the same thing. It's so simple. It so connects, right? Because I'm really into simplicity. I can draw up a hell of a theory and do nothing with it. And so anyway, I was like, I want to just figure out what all these are and what all these are connected. I'd been living it for 30 some years, but I hadn't always named it. And so I actually worked with a guy, and I think that's the other thing that helps me is when I want to get something done, sometimes I hire a coach, I hire a professional, I hire someone to help talk me through it. And sometimes I chat with AI. That's also become kind of a brainstorming tool. And so anyway, when it finally clicked on what I was going to write about, I am really big on streaks. And so
I like that.
Yeah, so it's how I've lost weight. A while back, I lost 50 pounds. So I do streaks. And so I use an app on a Mac. It's a great app called Day One. And it's a perfect journaling. So I journal every morning, every night. And then I do streaks. And I've used streaks in business to help people be successful, right? You're going to do this higher level thing, this one next right thing. You're going to do, how many days in a row can you do it? It's front of mind. It's accountability. And so I'm like, when it all came together to write the book, I wrote every day, and I never missed a day. My partner, she's going like, can we just take a day off? I'm like, nope, got a streak.
Got a streak going.
And so I wrote it in 62 days. The first
draft. That's impressive. That's impressive.
And then, of course, the editor, you've done the process. Right. Yep. Actually, not as bad as I thought. I think with some of the software we can use today, it's much easier than it was, say, I wrote another book 20 years ago. So I plan to write another
20 years. Yeah.
Yeah. So much easier. And so for me, what it was is just getting it and just getting in that daily habit. And it's funny because that's what the book was about. And then so every day, what I would do in my online journal is I'd write down how many words I wrote, how many words I had all to date, and what percentage was to be done.
Nice.
And that's how, again, and I think when we work that way, so I do it in many different ways, is, every day, what's my highest priority? I can only, look at new so often. And so that's actually how I got it. It really was intentional actions, create intentional results.
what I like about the streak strategy, interestingly enough, I learned about streaks from my twin daughters. They were like 13 or 14. They were driving us crazy. They were bickering. It was just constant chaos and contention. So I took their phones away. And they were freaking out. Talk about addiction and recovery. They were freaking out. The first 3 days, man, they were like, I need my phone. And I asked them, what's so important that you need your phones? And they said, I'm going to lose all my streaks. What?
Right, in their
So
games,
Snapchat
right?
has a streak thing. Same strategy. How many days can you go back and forth with somebody? Which is psychologically smart, but you know, when you're just Snapchatting with somebody for whatever, again, kind of a waste of time. But for them at 13, 14 was incredibly important. But
absolutely,
using it the way you're using it, what a smart way. And then the second time I heard about streaks was from this guy, you may have heard of him. His name is Jerry Seinfeld. And so Jerry does the same thing. He sets up to see how many times how many days in a row he can write new jokes. And he talks about keeping the streak going, or he calls it a chain, keeping the chain going.
Right.
So can you do it for 3 months nonstop, for a year nonstop, or whatever? And again, back to the dopamine hit. I mean, this is a great way to get a dopamine hit because you did the streak. You did what you were supposed to do today. You did that. Maybe it was, you wrote that one page or whatever it was you wrote, or you did that one thing, but you've done it now for 65 days consecutive. That's a win.
Yeah, it was kind of a letdown when I finished, to be honest.
Sure.
Like, oh, the streak ends.
Now
but, but one of the things I do is I journal every morning and I journal every night. And it doesn't have to be anything, but it gets it out of my head. And I just find the written word doesn't lie to me. I'll lie to myself in my head. But when I put it down on screen, it's pretty powerful. And so, that's something I've done for a long, long time.
I love it. I love it. Doug, we're out of time. What's the name of the book?
The book is right here. The Day Makes the Year Makes a Life. It's on Amazon, Barnes and Noble. Appreciate if buy two, give one away. And one of my concepts is give to get. So if you want to get things in life, you got to give things in life. So
absolutely. And I'll put the links here in the show notes. You guys can just click on there, check out the books. I love it. We covered a lot of great content, a lot of great strategies today. Doug, thank you so much for stopping by. Looking forward to having you back again.
Bert, it was awesome. Thank you very much. And have a good rest of your week.
You too.